Welcome, everyone, back to day 2 of the symposium. And we will begin with some remarks from Ambassador Mull. The rector, I think, will introduce the ambassador. Please.
It is my really great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Stephen Mull, who has served as US Ambassador to Poland since October 2012. We are honored that he has taken the time to include Gdańsk in his very busy travel schedule this week in order to open the second day. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to come yesterday, of our symposium, and to share with us his thoughts on the right to know, promoting free media in Central and Eastern Europe. Ambassador Mull is a member of the US Senior Foreign Service with the rank of Career Minister. He joined the Foreign Service in 1982, and one of his first foreign postings was to Poland in the middle 1980s. He later served in South Africa and the Bahamas as Deputy Chief of Mission in Jakarta and as US Ambassador to Lithuania in 2003 to 2006. Sorry, I have to read it. There's so many facts that it's difficult to remember. His senior position at the State Department in Washington have included Director of the Office of Southern European Affairs, Acting Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs, Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, and Executive Secretary. Ambassador Mull is the recipient of 2 Presidential Meritorious Service Awards and many State Department awards. Please join me in welcoming of Ambassador Stephen Mull.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Rector Ross, and so many other friends of the U.S.-Polish relationship, like Len Baldiga. Good to see him again. And it's just such a great honor to come to this conference. This is actually my 3rd time in Gdańsk just in this week. I came last weekend for a couple of days for the celebrations of the opening of the European Solidarity Center, which was just such a great experience and really a magnificent repository of so much that has happened here in building democracy over the past several decades, and also a great location to build on that democracy and to promote more successes, because there's a lot of work for all of us to do on that front. In fact, I had a very nostalgic moment when I was here last Sunday. I was walking along to one of the events at the center, and all of a sudden I looked at the spot I was at on the street. It looked very familiar, and all of a sudden I remembered that on my very first visit to Gdańsk was exactly 30 years before, on that day, on August 31st, 1984. And my job as a junior political officer in the embassy was to come to Gdańsk and look and see, had the communist authorities succeeded in killing off the Solidarity trade union movement. So my job was to go to the shipyard and see, would people demonstrate, would people be very well organized, and report back to Washington if that were the case. And so as I was walking along that street, I was arrested by the secret police and taken to what they called a radiowozik, a paddy wagon, what we would call in the United States. And I was terrified because I was only in the country for a couple of weeks. And I sat there for an hour. Then they took me to a police station and interrogated me. And all I kept saying was, I am a diplomat. I demand the right to call my embassy. And they took out a phone and said, OK, call the embassy. Well, I had just arrived. I didn't know the telephone number for the embassy. So finally, they laughed at me and let me go. So, today, thinking back to what those days were like, it's just a phenomenal experience. It's hard to imagine. Not only was there no email, no Twitter, no Facebook, no no internet, which made it hard enough to communicate the old-fashioned way. But lacking all of those things, we had on top of that a very difficult, oppressive system where the authorities actively prevented the flow of information coming into Poland. And this stands in such a violation of the Polish spirit, of the Polish freedom, that it was a really depressing atmosphere to work in. I remember, and it wasn't just the news. The news was terrible. If you would turn on the evening Wiadomości, the evening news, it was always the same sad face, reading this very difficult to understand Polish that didn't really sound very interesting at all, and of course never reported on any of the interesting news around the world. My job as a junior political officer, and every morning I had to come in and pick up the newspapers, so-called newspapers, Tribuna Ludu, Życie Warszawy, Rzeczpospolita, which of course still exists today, but of course they were much different products then. They were completely controlled and censored. One of the worst jobs I had, the Polish press agency, PAP, which of course still exists today in a much different form, had a news wire service. And so my job, I had to come into the embassy every morning and get what had come from that wire service every night and look at every article and cut it up and give it to the senior leaders of the embassy so they could know what happened overnight. And it was a dreadful job. I remember one of the stories was about the glorious leaders of North Korea had brought together all of the diplomatic corps in Pyongyang and had taken them out to the rice fields to participate in the glorious socialist harvest of rice. And I read that, I thought, oh, I could have a worse place to work than here in Poland. At least I didn't have to participate in socialist harvest festivals. The control of information was not only limited to news, it was also culture. You couldn't really get much access very easily and legally to Western culture. Even movies. Last year we have in Wrocław an American Film Festival that we worked together with the city authorities in Wrocław. And last year there were 82 American films that you could see in a single week in Wrocław. When I was in Poland the first time in the 1980s, there were maybe 4 American films that you could see for the whole 2 years that I worked here. One of the most popular ones, for reasons I'll never figure out, was the Blues Brothers. You could always see the Blues Brothers playing somewhere in Warsaw. So it was also the atmosphere just was so based on a fear of outsiders and outsidedness and outside influences and different views that might conflict with the line that the Communist Party wanted to follow because of Soviet pressure. And I remember one of the more interesting experiences I've had this year was I see one of your partners is IPN. Earlier this year, I went to see IPN to do some business. We had some former prison camp workers who had lied their way into the United States. And so we were looking to have someone, whether IPN would be interested in prosecuting them. So I went and had a meeting at IPN, and at the end, the director asked me if I knew that they had a file on me. And I said, no, I didn't. And they just wanted to know if I would like it. And I said, sure, I'll take it. So I filled out a form. And they said, we'll call you in about 6 weeks, and you can come back and get your file. And they called me 6 weeks later. They said, bring a big bag. I came back. There were 10 kilograms of documents from the 2 years I had spent in Poland in the 1980s. And it was so interesting and sad and very funny also to look through it. I came here to Gdańsk quite often back then. I would deliver messages from Ronald Reagan to now ex-President Wałęsa, and just make contacts with the democratic movement here. And I would usually go to the same places. I would go to the shipyard. I would go to St. Bridget's Church. I would go to other places around the city. And in these files I was reviewing, they had drawn a map of all of the places that I usually visited in Gdańsk. And then they hired a team of a half a dozen secret service, secret police, to trace those steps with a camera. And they took pictures, dozens of pictures of brick walls that might have a loose brick that I might be hiding secret messages in. And the fact that I was just 26 years old and that they had so many people so afraid of me, I was clearly just visiting people and talking to them. But it's just very symptomatic of the kind of fear that prevailed during those days. Thankfully, so gone and so much a part of the past. So in dealing with this, the United States government, throughout the years of the Cold War, pursued a strategy not only of containing Soviet expansion and defending our allies in NATO and elsewhere around the world from Soviet threats and Soviet pressures, but it was also promoting the kinds of ideas that we believe make for a healthier world and a healthier place to live, namely freedom of speech and freedom of information. And I think it's one of the great legacies of the Cold War that the United States and its allies, other allies in the West, did pursue such a policy through institutions like Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, and all of the other Western news agencies. Today, very often, as we know so much about how governments work and don't work, there's a tendency, I think, for us to look back at the period of a Cold War as a kind of moral equivalence, that there were really bad things about the West, economically speaking, from a human rights perspective. There were the United States supported and had close allied relationships with dictators or people who didn't treat their people very well. An equivalence between that and that brand of Soviet communism that made life so miserable here. And it's obviously, during the Cold War, when you didn't hear, especially living in this part of the world, you didn't have a lot of information about what was going on in the West. There was a tendency to mythologize about it, that life was always better there, that there was no problems, and it was just a paradise to live. So here we are, 25 years after the end of the Cold War. We know it's not a paradise in the West. There are problems in the United States. There are challenges in the United States. But to suggest that there's a kind of equivalence between the West's promotion of freedom of speech, freedom of information, freedom of the press, the free flow of ideas, the free flow of people around the world, with the kind of Soviet oppression that aimed to control everything and to completely limit the individual's freedom of thinking, is just it's a false equivalence. I don't think it's equivalent at all. And I think those of us who were involved in these campaigns throughout the years of the Cold War can be very proud of having a huge impact in changing the course of history in places like Poland. One of the most colorful and memorable Polish Americans I've ever had the chance to know in my more than 30 years was Jan Nowak-Jeziorański, who of course was the director of the Polish service for Radio Free Europe, such a committed activist on behalf of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of travel, and such a great American patriot and a great Polish patriot. And it was such an honor. I met him before I came to Poland for the second time in the 1990s, and to see him traveling back and forth and see the pride that he felt before he passed away about everything that had happened in Poland that previously he had just thought was impossible. So the United States invested a lot in Radio Free Europe and the Voice of America, but it wasn't just about news services and radio. radio programs. It was also culturally. We always made sure that we had a good American presence at the Jazz Jamboree, which takes place every fall in Warsaw. We tried to get as many films into the embassy that we could. We've been, throughout the communist period, were very active in the Fulbright program, which brought Polish academics to the United States and American academics here to Poland to try and build those ties outside of government-to-government contacts. We promoted an international visitor program where we would identify new upcoming leaders of the future to bring them to the United States for a month to start making contacts, again, outside of government-to-government programs. One of the great things about U.S. promotion of democratic values and freedom of speech during the Cold War was that some of the best things that happened had nothing to do with the government. There was a great deal of support in American society for people living here in Poland. Last week, I had the privilege to spend a lot of time with Minister of Culture, Małgosia Omilanowska, who recalled when she was a young mother in Poland in the 1980s, how she was, without even asking for it, was adopted by a church in the United States that regularly sent her not only information and magazines, but also things for her child to eat and clothes for her to eat. American trade unions were very active in promoting ties and the flow of information and material help to people in Poland. My mother was a member of the United States Steelworker Union, a very proud trade unionist, and I remember her union at her factory getting together and taking up collections and sending shoes and clothes, information, videotapes here to trade unionist counterparts in Poland. And working as a young man here, as a young diplomat, I was also very proud in a personal way to help. Every time we would get magazines and newspapers from the United States, we would always give them to our Polish friends to share and get a different perspective about what was going on throughout the country. I remember once Zbyszek Romaszewski, a member of the Committee to Defend Workers, who sadly passed away last February. He was one of my closest contacts here, and he said, we need a printing press, we need to print, and this was when computer printers were just becoming popular. He said, could you get me a printer? And so I said, yes, and so I went to Berlin and smuggled a printer from West Berlin back here to help. We would often invite Polish friends to our home to watch movies and just talk about life in America. And the great thing about all of these things was that it wasn't preaching one party line. We showed movies that were very critical about social conditions in the United States. We disseminated newspapers and magazines and academic journals that showed the liveliness of the debate, that the value we should be striving for is not the American system, not the American policy, but really more the values of the West, of freedom, of thinking, of being able to move and do whatever you want with your life. And that was really one of the most valuable things that I think we conveyed. Now, this year we've been celebrating the 25th anniversary of the end of communism in Poland, and it's been a great year. It was really great to have President Obama here back in June to join in the celebration, and last week's ceremonies here in Gdańsk were really moving as well. And so when you see those of us who've been coming to Poland over so many years, it's a very easy temptation to think that, well, our work is done here. Poland is a greatly successful democracy, promotes democracy elsewhere throughout the world. But those of us who follow what's going on in Europe, especially to the east of here, know that our work is only beginning. And I think that that's especially true in the era of the kind of information war that we've been seeing accompanying the very real war that the Russians have been conducting just next door in Ukraine. Just over the course of the past year, I've been really puzzled at so many things. Again, like in the old days, in the 80s, some of the things are funny, some of the things are sad, of what people believe and what people repeat. I know as Ukraine was concluding its campaign to sign an association agreement with the European Union last fall, all of a sudden Russian-sourced material, started putting out propaganda that if Ukraine joined the European Union, it would mean that homosexuals would rule Ukraine as dictators, and that's why Ukraine shouldn't join the European Union. Just sort of ridiculous kind of accusations, but nevertheless got people talking and started creating some opposition to what the majority of Ukrainians clearly want. After the outbreak of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine, I remember seeing on Russia Today, this terrible news station, of lines of people at the border, and the announcer was saying that these people were fleeing Ukraine because of the terrible oppression against Russian speakers. They were fleeing to get back into Russia. But if you magnified the photos, you could see, in fact, it was a bunch of small business people waiting in line near the border with Poland to go across into Poland to do shopping, to come back. And the horrible incident of the separatists shooting down the Malaysian airliners back in July, the kinds of lies and half-truths that Russian propaganda machine spewed out, unfortunately, is very, very effective. So we've talked a lot about this year in our government contacts. In fact, it was an important part of President Obama's conversations with President Komorowski back in June when they were here, that this is a real threat to those of us who want to promote freedom, and we need to do something about it. And I think President Komorowski is right. There are different ways of handling it. I know some people are saying we should just stop giving visas to members of the Russia Today TV crew. We should start shutting off access to information from those involved in promoting it. The approach that we have in the United States is, I don't think we want to go there. We don't want to become like them in terms of how we promote information policy. Rather, the more appropriate way is to do more of what we've been so successful ourselves, and that's getting the truth out. And one of the great things about working in strategic communications today is there are so many avenues to do that. And maybe I'm naive, but I'm pretty convinced, based on my experience here, that if you open up all of the restrictions on free information on what's going on through Twitter, through other aspects of social media, through cultural channels like films, through blogging, through all the different ways we have at our disposal to talk about what's really going on from our perspective, inevitably the truth is going to come out, and the truth will be the most persuasive of all. I think that very phenomenon is what explains the success of Ukraine, despite its significant problems over the past year, the success of the Maidan in completely changing the strategic orientation of the Ukrainian government. And so I think it's really important for those of us who support these values here in Poland, the United States, elsewhere in Western Europe, to really maximize our efforts to use all of those channels to get the truth out. And so that's why I think the Radio Free Europe legacy is one that's still very much alive today, and that we need to look to. And that's why this conference is such a good thing to have, because not only can we feel good about what we did in the past, but let's think about it, about what we can learn from that experience and apply it to much more modern circumstances today. So I'll wrap up there. I'll be very happy to hear any questions or comments that any of you have. And once again, thanks a lot for having me here.
Probably everybody here would, I doubt anybody would dissent from the thesis that the more we can do to get objective information in the regions that need it today, and particular relevance to Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, and so on, Crimea. From your point of view, are there some sort of priorities, some things we should be trying to do most? I mean, in one sense, it can be argued it was easier to get information into Poland by shortwave radio than to get information, let's say, into Eastern Ukraine or into the Russian Federation itself. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on what might be the most efficient way to try to get information in, satellite television or Any suggestions on how to prioritize this?
Sure. Thanks. That's a great question, Ross. It's very interesting. I think it's easy to fall into a pattern of thinking that we're facing a resurgent Russia that wants to basically recreate the Soviet experience and to play the part that the Soviet Union played in world politics throughout the Cold War. And it's easy to come to that conclusion because, of course, they use very many of the same tactics that Stalin used, perhaps in a more modern, glossier way. But there's some key differences between Russia today and what we encountered in the Soviet Union, and that Russia today is much more integrated with the world economy. It's a member of the World Trade Organization. It doesn't have the command economy levers at its disposal that it had throughout the Warsaw Pact during Soviet times. So I think it becomes a lot easier to get information and to influence things inside of Russia than it was before. It's not easy. It's easier than what it was, just through business connections that senior Russian businesses have developed over the past 20 years, through the tourism industry. Record numbers of Russians travel throughout Europe. And to ways that just never happen. And so these kinds of commercial and tourist and educational exchanges that happen on a much larger scale inevitably open up much more avenues to get information in. So I think as we impose costs on Russia for its aggression on Ukraine, we have to make sure that we don't do it in a way that cuts back on that kind of human interaction that I think is the best and most effective way. Now, that kind of information policy takes a long time because even though a lot more people are traveling, it's still only a tiny fraction of the population of Russia. And so that's why I think we have to look at other more modern means of communication. I know there's some work underway. One of the great Polish initiatives, I think, over the past couple of years is the European Endowment for Democracy, which my friend Jerzy Pomianowski heads up in Brussels. And I know they are looking, TV is just, TV and internet are the way to go these days if you want to reach a large number of people. And I think the endowment, we've had very interesting conversations with them, as well as numerous NGOs in the United States, are looking at how we can exploit television broadcasting and use of social media. And so I think that's really where we need to concentrate our attention. Over here. Yes, sir.
Please. You want to take it
over? Thank you, Ambassador, for your speech. My question concerns public diplomacy. There have been big upheavals, of course, with American public diplomacy since the end of the Cold War, the closure of USIA in 1999, a budget that seems to go up and down. Could you comment on whether that's affected your role as ambassador in Poland? Do you feel that you're lacking resources, or that it has an impact on how you can function as an embassy in Poland in 2014?
Yes and no. Obviously, I'd like to have a lot more money than what I have, and I'd like to come up with some really interesting ideas and be able to implement them with the extra money. Sometimes, one of the I talked earlier about Western culture is not necessarily the paradise that people thought it was back in the 1980s. Every time I see that when I meet with young people in Poland, and most of their exposure to American culture is in the form of reality TV shows that doesn't really show the best side of the United States or of any country. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to bring other aspects of American culture here to promote it? So the money isn't there to do that. But God moves in mysterious ways. There are other ways that we didn't have available that cost next to nothing. And social media is just such an incredible tool. I was very skeptical when I first came to Poland that something like Twitter could be of any use in diplomacy because you're limited by 140 characters. You know, those of us who are diplomats deal with these big, lofty, complex ideas. How could you ever say anything meaningful in 140 letters? And before I came here, I was saying goodbye to my previous boss, Secretary Clinton, and she told me, you know, I don't understand this either, but I know it's really big. And if you're going to succeed as a diplomat, you have to do this. And so I opened an account, and within a month, I was hooked. It's such an effective way, first of all, to get news about what's going on. If you follow leading commentators, leading news outlets, I can instantly know what people are talking about and what's making news in ways I've never been able to in my career. And having that news puts me in a position to be able to instantly react. So if someone is starting to say something that's untrue about American policy or misinterpreting American policy and people start talking about it, I can immediately weigh in and say, actually, that's not true, or actually, I would phrase it more this way. And it's actually a great vehicle to get dialogue. I mean, not everything we do is right, so to constantly adjust our policy to make sure we're doing the right thing, getting the input from people is so valuable. And, you know, I see my friend Vitek in the foreign ministry here, you know, with all due respect to us as diplomats, Vitek, we tend to not always tell the truth to each other because it's not to say we lie, we don't lie, but it's just, you know, it's like, you don't always tell the truth to your spouse. You know, if your spouse has been putting on weight, you don't necessarily tell her that. At least you have to do it in a very nice way. And so in even very close diplomatic relations like we have with the United States and Poland, you know, we try to be polite and friendly, even though, you know, sometimes issues develop in not always the very best way. So on Twitter, you don't have to worry about people, you know, worrying about your feelings. I mean, they'll tell you about it. It was very clear to me. One of the biggest issues we have as the United States and Poland is that Poles are really angry that they need visas to go to the United States. There are lots of reasons why that is, and I'm working very hard, and I'm actually very confident that the day will come where Poles won't need visas to go to the United States. And so knowing that in a very unvarnished, sometimes rude way was really helpful for me in terms of figuring out what do people care about the United States, and then that allows me to shape our policy back home in Washington, or to try to, as well as explain things here. So the only thing Twitter costs is time, and it can take a lot of time to do, but it's also very valuable in terms of getting our message out and improving relations with countries. So yeah, on the one hand, we don't have the money to do things that would be helpful, but on the other hand, we can do other new things that don't really cost anything. And another important element is the growing role of private-public partnerships. I spend a lot of time. There's a huge American business community here in Poland. It creates about 200,000 jobs here in Poland. It's about $20 billion worth of investment, and that presence is growing. And they're very invested not only with money in Poland, but they're invested in their lives here. They want to succeed. They want a better relationship between Poland and the United States. And so their resources are really helpful in terms of promoting information about studying in the United States and creating internships for young Poles to go off and intern in the United States. On the cultural front, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra is coming to Poland in October. Again, that's a completely private initiative that many of the U.S. investors here in Poland wanted to bring the Chicago Symphony Orchestra here, and so they're going to do it. And none of that costs any taxpayer money at all. So I think, you know, because of the broad social engagement we have, if our government budget isn't what we'd hope it would be, there's nevertheless a lot of other resources in our society as a whole that we can bring to bear. Vitek, tell me the truth. Now he's going to say.
Okay, yeah, perhaps one last question, if you have time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. A very short comment. Wielkiewski, Foreign Ministry. Ambassador, I'm going to have to take that to the Foreign Ministry and tell them that you said that you're lying to us. I'm sorry.
No. No, I'm not lying. I never, ever lie.
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
I don't always say everything. So.
I just want to say a good thing to American taxpayers that Ambassador Mull is doing a really wonderful job down here. He's an icon, he's a celebrity, and he is a workaholic, and he's very much appreciated in Poland, and he's very much appreciated in the Foreign Ministry as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Vitek. Thanks. Okay.
So thank you very much. Everybody, please join me in thanking Ambassador Mull for coming and sharing with us very good words. Thank you.
Thanks.